На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. We're joining you this week with a packed game week of fixtures to cover from last weekend. In the midst of another game week of RPL fixtures, as Karelia versus Siska is actually taking place in the background at the time of recording. But it's been a little bit of a quieter week than it had last week, obviously with all the goings on that with Rangnick and Lokomotiv and everything else. So we're going to take up some time to recap some of the recent matches, review the end of the FNL first half of the season as their winter break has now already begun. And also, starting off, we're going to take a look at who Ralf Rangnick's successors are at Lokomotiv. So since we last recorded, and of course I am joined by David.
Hello.
And Richard.
Good morning, gents. How are we all?
I feel like I'm in deja vu when it comes to Moscow clubs and sporting directors. As everyone will probably already know, Rangnick has now been confirmed at Manchester United as their initially interim manager. His work permit has been granted. And the man who was alongside him working in tandem as the technical director, Tomas Zorn, has now been installed as the sporting director. In addition to Zorn, he's going to be assisting Lars Kornetka, who is largely Rangnick's right-hand man, who's been appointed the head of sport and development at Lokomotiv, and that was on Monday following the departure of Rangnick. To quickly look at Zorn, though, as he has lots of experience in the Russian game, as we all know, he will be responsible for coordinating internal projects within the sports department, planning team lineups and managing contracts. He will also be involved in the club's transfer activities, which include scouting promising players and assessing potential newcomers to Lokomotiv. In addition, he will oversee the direction of the sports science and medicine and organise the training camp for the main team. Now, to quickly first go through a little bit of Zorn's career, he is a Russian-German football administrator and trained lawyer. Born in Moscow, he moved to Germany while he was a child, studied at the Free University of Berlin. It's obtained a DFB player agent license and took up activity as an agent initially in Germany. He then, of course, moved after his studies and getting experience in Germany. He moved back to Russia, had worked with the Sponaya setup as an administrator behind the scenes, sorting things out for them, worked as a football agent, was famously former agent of Elmir Nabiullin. And then in May 2019, he took over as the position of General Director of Spartak Moscow. Now, he had already worked for Spartak or alongside Spartak as a FIFA match agent for 2 years, but this was him now really becoming part of the hierarchy at the club. His activities was to be the office of the managing director and sporting director rolled into one. His first big decision that was really his own was bringing in Domenico Tedesco from Schalke. And I think a lot of Spartak fans would probably agree that that was arguably one of the better things that he did during his tenure. To quickly go over some of the signings, because he was responsible for transfers during his Spartak time. Zorn brought in to the club Andrei Schürrle, Gus Till, Alexander Sobolev, Ezekiel Ponsa, Alex Kral, Rezian Mirzov, and Jordan Larson, amongst others. But even though that is a little bit mixed, and he did bring in Tedesco, who was largely adored by the Spartak fan base, Zorn himself, his time at Spartak was generally thought of by a lot of the fans as mixed at best. A lot were pleased upon his departure. Of course, that departure which was paving the way for Shamil Gazizov and then started the sort of decline in that position now to where Spartak have had two people there as sporting directors since Zorn and are now currently without any form of sporting director. So a bit of a mess. But Richard, what do you think about Zorn? Do you think that he could maybe replicate some of those clever transfer market signings that he did at Spartak, or Do you think maybe he's going to be a little bit more of a Mirzov job? And do you think that he's going to improve Lokomotiv? Because I think the best part of Rangnick moving to Manchester United in Lokomotiv's perspective is that he's no longer at Lokomotiv after the turbulent summer they've had.
It's really difficult to say at the moment, isn't it? Because obviously, you brought it up there, James, didn't you? His signings record at Spartak was very, very mixed. You put the likes of, Kral and Larson, you put them as good signings. You put probably players like Ponce kind of in the middle, a bit hit and miss. And then you probably put the likes of Mirsov, Till, and players like that as flops. So his signing record was very, very mixed. Although he did bring Domenico Tedesco to the club, like you said, so that's a net positive, I would say. It's difficult to judge, Zorn at the moment. I thought, and considering the chaos, what's happened at Spartak since, maybe at the time it was looked on as negative, but maybe looking back at it now, it might actually, even though he was a bit hit and miss at Spartak, looking at it now, it might not necessarily have been the worst thing in the world. So let's see. Obviously, at least the Rangnick to Man United thing has been done nice and quick. At least Zorn has come in now. Konetka is going to come in and assist him. He's obviously got an interesting couple of windows ahead because I think Lokomotiv desperately needs some. It's crazy to think they spent a huge amount of money on players, yet they're still lacking a striker, really, I think. Smolov has dropped off in form since his early season good start. Zailovic has just not done it for them since signing. So, but already if you wonder, it's going to be quite limited as to what they can do in January because they've already spent a lot of money this summer on transfers. And so, it's really difficult to say at the moment. Probably the only good thing to come out of it really is that at least replacements for Rangnick have been announced nice and quickly. But I think things are tough at the moment for Lokomotiv. So I think they're in for a fascinating few months, I think.
Yeah, I think you need to try and find out what his influence was alongside Rangnick, really, to put any sort of summary on Zorn's initial time, because he is largely a Spartak Moscow reject, to be frank. He was kicked out of the club, essentially, just sacked quite vociferously and without a lot of thought into it. The German sort of revolution, I think, as many people were calling it at the time at Lokomotiv, just never really took place, and it's not the first time that Loko have tried to do it either. Way back in 2016, Loko were able to rid Olga Smoretskaya from her directorial position, in which she had her own son-in-law working as the sporting director, which is just the height of nepotism. Ilya Gerkus came in, the former Zenit commercial director, and then Yuri Siomen. But Gerkus in 2018, was it, brought in Eric Stoffelshaus, the former Schalke man, same as Tedesco. And that was their first kind of attempt at this German revolution. And on the pitch, that period from Stoffelshaus up until Rangnick was highly successful, winning numerous Russian cups, winning the league, getting into Europe regularly, really bringing Lokomotiv up to the next step. So I remember when Rangnick was first brought in to Loko as the consultant, and I think everyone was quite excited. I kind of wanted to see what his plans were. He himself even said that he wanted to try and create like the Red Bull in Moscow, I think was exactly what he said, if I remember correctly, paraphrasing it, of course. Yeah, that was it, sorry. I've got the phrase here. I want to create a Russian Red Bull, a system to bring the best players in and develop them. Russian football has the potential to do this. We just need a good plan and program. Early doors, he was very much all about the long term. Well, that long term lasted less than a year. So, yes, you're going to go calling when a club the size of Manchester United come in for your services, without a shadow of a doubt. I think that's a once-in-a-lifetime job that you can't really turn down. But if you just look at the way that he went about his business early on, we went across it a little bit last week, but signings, one thing that Rangnick generally tends to do is lower the average age of the squad and look with an eye for the future. Alexis Bakar has probably been the best of this, but other players have severely underperformed and just look like bizarre choices to make when he ostensibly had a very settled, quite well-performing squad with an overperforming manager. And it seems like he's just came in and ripped all that apart in a sort of weird... Arrogance is maybe the wrong word, but he kind of just ripped apart a vision that was already working and wanted to implement his own, and then left after a year. What part of that did Zorn take place? Did Zorn take hold? What was his responsibilities? Obviously, we're never going to find out that, and at least in the very short term. But it's a little bit worrying that Zorn has been part of this, seen this decline. I think Lokomotiv's attendance at the last game was only 5,000 against Akhmat. So the fan clamour obviously has ridden far off and derailed. So it's a little bit of a worry that Zorn is now being given more control with the man who is ostensibly Rangnick's puppet, essentially, or two of Rangnick's puppets who have been put in place in Gizdal and Kornetka. What is the plan? What is the next step? I'm just very, very suspicious of all of this, Richard, and I think maybe some of that is my Spartak links in seeing what Zorn did to Spartak as well. Yes, Tedesco was a good signing, but there was no long-term plan. Everything was very much short-termism. Made some good signings, but equally some absolutely horrendous ones that they're still paying the price for now.
Yeah, I think again it's a classic example, like you said, James, and then at Lokomotiv, I'm kind of getting the impression that they tried to do too much too soon. It was a settled squad. I've absolutely no problem whatsoever with bringing in identifying young talent along the Red Bull models. Identifying young talent, bringing it in, selling it on at a profit. That's obviously was the goal. I think that's something that Russian football has to improve on, the signings and the development, because at the moment, that's one way Russian football developing is signing young players and then selling them on, and the league becomes more sustainable. You generate profits, you then reinvest. But yeah, I think they tried to do it too soon. I think they probably should have held back some of the spending in the summer, like signings like Tiknesian just were bizarre in my opinion. He hadn't done a huge amount at CSKA, and then they massively overpaid for him. But yeah, Bekar was probably the shining light. Tin Yedvai was quite good, those two signings. But the others, struck me as a bit of panic buys, really. Especially Smolov is not the youngest striker anymore. They probably should have looked at another striker there. But I think they tried to do too much too soon. They should have kept Nikolic probably till the end of the season. Yeah, I really hope that for Lokomotiv's sake that things suddenly start recovering a little bit, because it's not been good so far, has it? But yeah, I think the idea in principle was right, but I think they tried to move too quick, too soon. It would have been better giving it a year to assess everything, and then in the summer of 2022, maybe then look at that kind of model. But yeah, who knows? We'll just have to wait and see. But it is all a bit messy at the minute at Lokomotiv, isn't it? It's not a good look.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one thing that this regime have been successful in is bringing Lokomotiv's average age down. We'll get into the performance last weekend and the loss against Arsenal Tula later on. But just looking at the lineup, Kudyakov, 17, Nenakov, 22, Yedvai, 26, Murillo, 24, Rebus, one of the few over 30 at 32, Barinov, 25, Bekar, 20, Lisakovic, 23, Marilashvili, 21, Petrov, 20, and Smolov, the only one over the age of 30 in the first team squad at 31. So he has successfully lessened, or they have successfully lessened the average age of the squad. But what really worries me with Zorn now is that little part of the preamble of his duties that are on Lokomotiv's website, and in particular, deciding team lineups. David, does that not set off red flags in your head of him being in charge of the team? Because that's what basically why they pushed Nikolic out of the door earlier on in the season.
Yeah, I'm still wary of the whole situation of what did Rangnick actually do during this period? There's so many rumors of essentially him just having large amounts of control, far too much control for what his position really was. We heard the rumors of players being withdrawn from selection by the doctors in an effort to undermine Nikolic and things like that. It's not ideal. I suspect with the new setup that Zorn, with the fact that he speaks fluent Russian and his long-term history of working in Russian football, will sort of make him the bridge between Kornetka and the Lokomotiv setup. I suspect that Zorn's role will actually be not as heavy as we might think, and it will be definitely more Kornetka. I was just reading that Rangnick called him the best video analyst in Germany. So I imagine, considering Germany and its links to the analysis of football in general, fairly high praise. There's talk still that obviously Rangnick's still going to be having, have his fingers in Lokomotiv as part of the consultancy that they've got going on. It's not, they didn't appoint Rangnick in the summer; they appointed his consultants, and he was just there representing that consultancy, and that's why Kornetka stayed on. So I suspect Rangnick's influence will be still there to a degree. Like, he'll still be able to, Kornetka will go to him and say, look, we're doing this, this, and this. What do you think? But I don't think much will change on the pitch. I imagine they will have very similar styles. They'll have, and off the pitch too, they'll have similar mindsets when it comes to transfers. We saw when they started, all these documents were coming out, right, which was detailing their long-term vision for the club. And we know that the limit is likely to exist in Russian football in one form or another for quite some time. And their plan was, well, they had a big shortlist of young Russian players they should buy. And that's why they went out and got Tiknizian and Maradishvili, and they spent that money on them. Because it's part of their long-term goal, right, to have players in that lineup. Obviously, I'm with you guys that I don't think Tiknizian has high potential, but that I can see what their plan was, but the way they went about it has just not worked in the slightest.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that the highlighting that Rangnick's continued influence probably will continue. Of course, the people in charge at the club are two of the three, anyway, of the triumvirate. There are Kornetka and Gisdol, who are Rangnick's right-hand men. Gisdol is a dismal coach, by all accounts of people who followed him both in Russia now and in Germany. But there's a reason why Rangnick appointed him, and he's the ultimate yes man. He allows Rangnick to pick his teams for him. He tells him in the style of play. He signs his players for him. Gisdol's just there as a figurehead, basically, in my opinion. I just find the whole thing very bizarre. You set up these systems in place, modern clubs do anyway, so that they can have a sustainable long-term future for the club. You have a plan in place of which the club follows. Yes, that plan gets amended if it's maybe not successful, but you have a system in which a manager leaves or a director leaves, any form of influential figure, then you just pick up another piece of the jigsaw. Difficult thing to do, of course, to find the one that fits. But in theory, you pick up another piece of the jigsaw to come in and replace them. No longer do you live on the whim of one individual. You don't have a manager who over-encompass, sees everything, is really successful, and then leaves them in no man's land. That's the idea. This is really bizarre because it's one of the first times I've seen where it's that, but with a director. It doesn't seem like a sustainable model. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe in the long term, this is exactly the plan, and they know that they're going to have short-term difficulties. And fair enough if that's the case, but looking at it without the expertise that these people have behind the scenes, it really does not look promising. But anyway, we'll move on from that because we have discussed to the nines all of Rangnick and Lokomotiv and Manchester United, because it's an interesting case that someone who has been so unsuccessful in Russia has suddenly got one of the biggest jobs in the world. It's a little bit baffling for those of us who, in my opinion anyway, who follow Russian football. Let us know on Twitter at Rus Football News. What do you think about Rangnick's time at Lokomotiv? Do you think that we have maybe given him an unfair chance? Do you think that maybe he needs, or his system and his consultancy team need a chance to do more long term because it is the bigger picture they're looking at? Let us know. Get in touch on Twitter and we'll retweet some of the best ones. Next, though, we'll take a little bit of a break and from the RPL and look to the FNL, as we've just ended what was the first half of the FNL season, David.
Yeah, that's all right. We say half.
Yeah,
not literally. They played 25 fixtures out of 38, so they're well over halfway. But yeah, we class the winter as the halfway stage, obviously, because of the long break. Yeah, season set up. There's nothing still decided, or nothing undecided. Wait, what's the way I want to say? Nothing is decided. I'll get there in the end. It's still early. The top of the table is still to play for, although we've got a couple of teams maybe just pulling away. The top was maybe not quite as close as it was. I don't know, maybe a month ago. Orenburg's still at the top and have gone 4 points clear in the last couple of weeks, as a couple of other teams have struggled. FNL Voronezh and Torpedo Moscow then just behind, quite close to each other, on 49 and 47 points. And then just behind those, we've got a nice group: Alania, SKA Khabarovsk, Neftekhimik, and we'll extend it down to Baltica as well, all within 5 points of each other, chasing the final top four position. There are some other teams sort of creeping up who have had some good form of late. Akron and Yenisei have both climbed the table in recent weeks with some good runs of form, but there may be just a couple of extra points out of it. But we can't count anything out. Last year we saw FNL at this stage of the season were in the relegation zone, and they climbed way up into mid-table with there's 13 games left to play, and they had a fantastic run and got themselves out of it. And things can change a lot. Transfers can happen, and there's still things that can change. But it's seemingly likely that we're going to probably see Orenburg, FNL, and Torpedo. I would be surprised to see, or certainly Orenburg, drop out of the top four. FNL and Torpedo are looking strong. But obviously, transfers may affect that. We know that FNL losing their goalkeeper, Ilya Svinov, the 21-year-old, he's going to go and sign for Spartak Moscow. I think that's actually maybe just been announced this morning. So they're going to lose that player in their team, and he's been a key role. He's just been awarded the Young Player of the Month this season in the FNL for some good performances. So they'll be going for it, and then Alania, who were denied the chance to play in the playoffs last year because of their stadium. Orenburg obviously were denied promotion entirely because of their stadium. That work's going to start over the winter break for them. They will be doing their stadium up. Alania have been working on theirs throughout the first half of the season. They've played several games in Grozny while that's going on. So if they're up there, they'll both be within. They both should meet the qualifications to go into the Premier League should they make it happen. If we look at the other end of the table, two teams sort of a little bit adrift is Tekstilshik and Metallurg. Tekstilshik have got they've gone the opposite way from last year's. They've got a very young squad, having had a very old squad in recent seasons. They've got a troop of guys on loan from Siska, Vadim Karpov, Lassana Ndiaye, and Tigran Avanesian. But they're struggling for goals mainly, and they're rooted to the foot of the table. They escaped relegation last year quite closely, and they're going to be right in the battle this season. Metallurg Lipetsk, who have struggled since promotion, look like they're probably going to be going down. Volgar, Astrakhan, who had Gami Dagalarov in the spring of last season. He was there on loan, and he scored a good few goals for them to set him up for his obviously insane run that he's been having at Ufa. And then Brotov Volgograd, who I think we talked about a few weeks ago on the pod. I don't still think they've won, so I think they're now up to maybe 13 or 14 games without a win, without me checking. They are really struggling. They were in the Premier League last season, and they're very much in with a chance of being relegated to the third tier if this form continues. Especially considering Kuban and Tom Tomsk have both had good runs of form and have climbed well out of that. Kuban were looking like heavy relegation candidates a month ago. They sacked their manager. They've just announced that a whole bunch of players will leave, and they're now out of the relegation zone. So they've had a good little run to make that happen. So now we're in that period. We've got 3 months off, and we're just waiting to see. If we've already talked about Svinov, if any more players will come and move up to the RPL. We've seen it in recent years. There's been a growing trend, which is a good growing trend that we want to see, of RPL clubs signing players from the FNL to play directly in their first teams. We've seen it work successfully with, for example, Makarov and Samoshnikov at Rubin. And obviously the whole of the Karelia team who are now flying are guys who were just playing in the... Granted, they were promoted, but they were all playing in the FNL last year. We've got Svinov, who's joined Spartak already. Rubin just announced the signing of Marat Apshatsev from Tom Tomsk. He's a 20-year-old defensive midfielder. I must admit, last year I watched Tom Tomsk a lot just to see Nikita Krivtsov. This year, Tom Tomsk were promoted with about a week to go before the season because, why did they get promoted? Something ridiculous happened, and then they were like, "Oh, you're actually back in the FNL again," after they'd sold all their squad because they thought they'd been relegated. So they just lumped together a whole bunch of players from the PFL and have somehow made it work. And Apshatsev, one of these guys who last year was playing for Spartak Nalchik in the FNL 2, and is now going to be playing in the RPL for Rubin. So I'm looking forward to seeing him. I need to do a bit more research on him, but that'll be interesting. And there's a bunch of other players who should be on the radars. Artur Galoyan from Velez, who was close to signing for Siska in the summer, had a chance to go to Ufa, but had all his eggs in the Siska basket. And then when that fell apart, the Ufa offer was no longer there. He's gone back to Velez Moscow as the captain and has been really, really amazingly good. And I'd love to see him. I'd love to see him at Rubin, my club, obviously, especially now that Oleg Shatov, which I don't think we've mentioned, Oleg Shatov announced his temporary retirement last month.
Temporary?
He has been struggling a lot with injuries.
It's going to grow younger.
Well, he's been struggling a lot with injuries. Has not played in a long time. And also, without being too specific, he seemed to indicate that it's been having an effect on his mental health. So he said he was retiring, but will make a second decision in the January transfer, or in the winter break, basically. But he's basically said to Rubin, act as if I'm retiring, but I will come back to play if I'm feeling up to it. So it's a massive shame that he's only 31 still, but we know he's had his troubles with injuries over the years, and he is a quality player. We've really been missing him since he's been out injured, and I'd love to see Galoyan come in to replace him as a player who would count as homegrown.
Could he make a step up?
I think so. He's really some player for this level. And I've been surprised that he's not been called up for. I don't know how his allegiances lie, but I'm surprised he's not had any sort of call up from the Armenian national team sort of set up. Considering we've had Spurtian get call ups, Ishkan Galoyan from Baltiga, who's just an average FNL striker, has been capped for the national team this year for the first time. I'm assuming Galoyan must have been contacted, but has said no for the time being, because he's undoubtedly got the quality to to play. If those two guys, Spurtian obviously is having a really good season for Krasnodar, but if Ishkan Galoyan can play for the national team, Artur Galoyan could definitely play for the Armenian squad. So yeah, I'd love to see that one happen. And we'll see if others, the top scorer in the league is Yushin from Nifty Khimki. He's got 18 goals. Hasn't scored a lot recently. Nifty Khimki sort of dropped down the league a little bit. Their manager has actually been linked to Ural recently. Kirill Novikov has been linked with the Ural job. We all know how Ural is struggling right now. Sorry, Andrew.
It's fine.
So yeah, sort of just sort of orally wandering around here. So I'll stop where I am now,
I think for anyone who hasn't seen it, I would highly recommend finding highlights of Kuban Alania back in November.
Oh yeah,
a nice 5-5 draw, which is a very, very rare occasion. In that game as well, for anyone who may not know, Kuban got former Tambov wingback Alexei Rubin, former Krasnodar central defender Alexei Glitsayenko, one of David's former old favourite Flames, who never really lived up to his early promise, and Igor Bezdenizhnik, who actually scored in the 5-5 as well. But my favourite of Kuban's current crop is left wing-back Yevgeny Georgi Gapon. He's only one of my favourites purely because of who his namesake is, and father Georgi Gapon, who was a Russian Orthodox priest in 1905, who led the peasant and workers movement towards the Winter Palace as part of an appeal to Tsar Nicholas II for workers' rights and for increased rights, and had all these iconoclastic images of the Tsar and of God, and of course resulted in the Bloody Sunday massacre. Gapon himself was actually not just a priest, but he was like a police informant for the then Ukraina, the secret police. And because he was a police informant and a socialist revolutionary member, he was actually murdered by the socialist revolutionaries. But it's just a little fun sort of aside there, because he is a namesake of Yevgeny Gapon, but Yevgeny the footballer is Yevgeny Georgi Gapon, whereas the priest is Georgi Yevgeny Gapon. So nice little namesake there. But it's an interesting Kuban side that I would not have thought would stay up with the nutcase of Robert Yevoktimov in charge as well. Rota look like they're in absolute hell. That's 5 losses in a row now, and they haven't won at all in 12 games. Kokolov, the former Dynamo manager, has been sacked, and they underwent a large overhaul in the summer, but still have some high quality players. I mean, Kamil Mulin is an excellent striker at FNL level. Sergei Makarov and Ilya Martinov in defence is too good to go down. Alexander Tashayev at left back, mind, is absolutely horrendous, and they deserve relegation purely for that alone. But Richard, any final thoughts from yourself on the FNL? Anyone you've been keeping an eye on? I know that Chaika got done for match fixing, and they've been battered. Sorry, that's a terrible Northeast joke about seagulls. Most people wouldn't understand that.
Yeah, that was the reason why Tom got reinstated, wasn't it? That was the reason David was looking for earlier. Just a few things on the FNL Torpedo. Yeah, they've only lost 2 games out of 25, but they've just drawn 11. I think that's been the major problem for them. They've just drawn too many games. They've just turned 3 or 4 of those draws to wins. They'd be sitting top of the table right now, and I think it is very important for Torpedo to get promoted, because obviously the Eduard Streltsov Stadium's getting modernised. So, Torpedo have ambitions. They've got a private owner. They have ambitions to be an RPL club. They've certainly got the structure in place to be an RPL club. So, it is fundamentally important in the next few years that they, either this year or next year, that they get promoted. Just one last other team I've got an eye on is Baltica, actually, curiously enough, because obviously Sergei Ignashevich, who didn't do a brilliant job at Torpedo last season, he's coming at Baltica and revived them a little bit. They're up to 7th place now in the league. Looks like they've been on a decent run of form. So, yeah, I'm really... The FNL looks really, really interesting. I think Orenburg on the one side, you could probably say looking certainties to come up. But behind that, there looks a very good scrap. for the playoffs, as David said, with those 6 teams: FAKEL, Torpedo, Alanya, SKA Khabarovsk, Nefta Khimki and Baltica. All a good batch of teams there, all, some have probably never been in the RPL before. I think Nefta Khimki never been in the RPL before. Some long-time absentees from the RPL in the shape of, I think, Baltica and FAKEL. And then, big famous names from the past like Alanya and Torpedo. So, yeah, it's a nice, good mix of teams. And, looking forward to seeing what happens over the winter break with transfers, ins and outs and maybe managerial changes. But, yeah, and as you said, James, Rotor, that's a really shocking story. Are we going to have a second situation where we're going to have a big stadium built for the World Cup like we have in Bordeaux in Saransk? Is it going to be another one in Volgograd playing third-tier football next season? Pretty shocking, really.
Yeah, potentially. It's a big worry for the RFU, considering they were really pushing to try and get Rotor and the other lower leagues World Cup stadia cities into the RPL as soon as possible to try and avoid those white elephants that we see to this day in Brazil. I think it's that stadium up north in Brazil where it's literally completely abandoned and overgrown now. It looks like a scene from the Last of Us video game rather than a thriving football stadium. It's a sad story, and I do really foresee that. I know Volgograd is one of the worries as well, but the Baltica is the biggest worry for me.
The one in Brasilia is shocking. I've read now it's being used as like a coaching car park facility. It's in Brasilia, yeah. There's some in Brazil which have just been, shockingly, It's you really want to try and avoid scenarios like that, don't you? I mean, I think Saransk, really, you've got to question whether it should have really been a host city, but that's a debate for another day.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, we don't have time for that one today, but it will make for an interesting debate. I mean, Kaliningrad was only done for geopolitical context of it being a Baltic Sea port, but like you said, Richard, that's again for another day. There was some RPL action that took place last weekend that we didn't get to cover on last weekend's pod due to the timing and nature of the podcast weekends at the moment. I'll start off with a quick review of Khimki versus Krasnodar. In my opinion, by quite some distance, most entertaining game of the entire weekend. It was a 3-3 draw in the end. To quickly go through it, Victor Claesson opened up the scoring quite early on, finishing off a nice counter-attack with an assist from Jean Cordoba, who actually went off injured within half an hour, replaced by Vladimir Ilyin. Krasnodar then got a penalty. It was, in my opinion, a penalty as well. I know there's been a little bit of discourse online regarding whether or not it was. If it was a penalty, I think it was quite clear. Gregor Kokoviak, with a horrendous effort, quite well saved by Ilya Lantratov, still the most underrated goalkeeper in the entirety of the RPL. Went in Krasnodar 1-0 at half time, and then the second half absolutely blew up. Ilya Kukalchuk got a pair of assists, 2 in 2 minutes. One firstly for Elmir Nabiullin to equalise, and then a second for old adulterer himself, Denis Gushakov, to put Khimki into the lead. Remy Cabella got one back for Krasnodar with a really nice finish. Kind of slalomed in between 2 or 3 players, took it back on his right foot and across Lantratov, had no chance. Only for Alexander Dolgov to put Khimki in the lead with 20 minutes left. Now, all 3 of Khimki's goals were absolutely dreadful defending from Krasnodar. Dolgov's in particular was criminal. He's not the biggest of players. He's quite a nice little ghost of a run to the back post, but totally free just to knock this knock across in with his head. Absolutely no Krasnodar defenders anywhere near him. And then late on, 10 minutes left, Vladimir Ilyin did equalise, and that's how the game ended. And that Krasnodar defence is really a story of the game and why, in microcosm of their season so far. Some of their football going forwards was absolutely electrifying. Real nice one-touch stuff. On the counter-attack in particular, looked really dangerous. Cabella and Claesson in excellent form, really orchestrating things for Krasnodar. Krakowiak had probably one of the worst games I've seen play for them. He just could not be arsed in the least. Not only did he not track back, he didn't even ever look like he even wanted to try and bother starting to track back. Sorokin and Kayo just couldn't deal with Khimki's crosses and long balls into the box to Ademi and Mirzov and Kukelchuk in the top three, up front in three. But this is why Krasnodar have had such an inconsistent season. But the sheer quality of players they've got still sit fourth at the current timing in the table. Really good going forwards, real good talent, but so shaky in defence. David, you kept an eye on Arsenal versus Lokomotiv, as I did tease earlier on in the podcast.
Yeah, it was a Monday night game, and I just had the sense Arsenal haven't looked so bad of late, considering their season in general. But Loco were going into this one with not many players available. They were still going to be having Kudiakov in goal. They were missing Kamano, Kirk. It was a weak lineup they were putting out. And I just thought if certain players turn up for Arsenal, then they should win. And they did quite comfortably win, and those players did turn up. Husevic, who will be a big loss for them going to Spartak in the winter. Opened the scoring from a King's Kangwa assist, and he'd had an earlier goal, almost a carbon copy, long ball over the top from Kangwa, which he latched up to and scored. He had a goal about 10 minutes earlier, ruled out for offside. It was very tight. And 10 minutes later, they scored the exact same goal. Then Yevgeny Markov chipped in with a brace, which I was very proud to say before the game that I thought he was going to do it. I picked him out. He's sort of not. Well, he's been on okay form of late. And with Kudiakov, in goal, I just had that sort of sense that he was going to turn up for this match, and he did. Flicked in a corner early doors and then stuck another one in. Kudiakov, he was named Loco's Player of the Month last month, but he's still 17, and young goalkeepers tend to be, if anything, weak in the air, and that's exactly what he was. Not that any of the goals were directly his fault, but they took advantage of the young goalkeeper and took their chances well. Loco got a late consolation through Pablo, and I'm sure they will be welcoming back. I think Kamano and Kirk are certainly both back in the squad this week for their match this evening against the Real, which they desperately need a win. Gizdol will be desperate to get something out of the game. I think Maradishvili is also available after having a negative COVID test today. So they need a result, but it was a big, important win for Arsenal. And they've got Khimki this week, Arsenal, and that's another game that if they want to stay in the league, they need to be winning that match. Khimki are relegation candidates just like they are, and they need to take that 3-1 win against Loco and move with it. So let's see if they can carry on.
I mean, I laugh at Markov because it's kind of ridiculous that he's gotten a brace in the end of 2021 against Lokomotiv. But yeah, it was a pair of really, really nice goals to his credit before he went off injured late on.
Yeah, but, and when I say he's been in good form, I mean he's looked dangerous. He's not scored for a little while, but he's actually looking like a striker who's putting some threat on the pitch rather than just not being on the pitch at all.
I love how the bar is that low for Markov that looking dangerous is playing like a striker. But no, he did. Yeah. He definitely did against Loco.
In a team that don't create any chances, if he can just make himself get there, then it's something. So yeah.
I mean, Arsenal probably could have won 5-0 this game at one point. I think they had Klusevic had a goal disallowed. They had another one where they were through on goal and hit the post, and it was Lokomotiv were all over the place. And for me, it was their defensive line was just criminally high. It was, if anything, part of Rangnick and Gizdol, whoever the hell it is, philosophy of that real high press, real high line, real aggressive defending. Just left Murillo and Jedvaj absolutely acres of space in behind their line. And Arsenal are really good, to their credit. One thing under back under Bozovic again. They're really good at exploiting these gaps in behind opposition defences. They did that against Zenit really well. Kustovic, Markov, Kings Kangwa, and Evans are just really good on the counter-attack like that. Highly deserved win. Richard, you watched the latest RFN derby in Rubin Dynamo. Surely you think that, agree like me, that if it wasn't for Georgi Zotov, that Rubin probably would have won that match.
Yeah, just very, very quickly, just one last thing on Arsenal versus Lokomotiv. Again, you pointed him out very briefly there, James Kings Kangwa, just some statistics courtesy of Football Wonder Kids on his game against Lokomotiv. 90 minutes, 2 assists, 5 chances created, 6 crosses, 8 duels won, 12 ball recoveries, 2 interceptions. So, yeah, very good all-round performance from him. That pass for Klusevic's first was brilliant. Pinpoint pass, good run from Klusevic, kept himself on side, lovely finish. And yeah, I do echo David's thoughts that he's going to be a big miss for Arsenal Tula going forward. They've got to make the most of him before he goes to Spartak. And yeah, Rubin versus Dynamo. I kept an eye on this, and yes, you're absolutely right that Georgi Zotov had an absolute shocker. He was dispossessed by, I think it was Vyacheslav Guryov in the middle from, I think it was from a Rubin corner. He was dispossessed, and then he laid it off to Makarov, who showed some good feet and slotted home the opening goal. Very good riposte from Rubin, though. They got back into the game. Kvaratskhelia with a good cross to find Murad Bakayev, who slotted home the equalising goal. And then second half, obviously, beginning of the second half, Rubin were pressing forward and they got a penalty. A shot had just cannoned off the post, and then Varela committed a foul in the box. It was one of those where he'd gone through the man just after the shot had been hit. It was a penalty, and Dreyer then put the penalty away for Rubin. And then after Zotov again, as this common theme, decided to play volleyball in the penalty box with his arm up. It was just a clear penalty. He had an absolute nightmare. But then Nicola Morrow shot wide. But at that moment, you got the feeling, even though they were behind in the game, Dynamo were getting on top. And it was only 2-3 minutes later when Sebastian Szymanski put a free kick into the box, and Fabian Balbuena has been brilliant all season, headed home the equalising goal, and then late on, Dynamo I think got a deserved victory, and it was courtesy of the player who has been recently voted the November Player of the Month in Sebastian Szymanski, and deservedly so based on his performances this season. Let's hope for Spornire's sake that Paulo Sousa in Poland keep not calling Szymanski up, because I think it's criminal how he's not getting a call up. And yeah, that was a good win for Dynamo. And I'll tell you one thing that's really underrated about them this season is, a lot of people have gone about their transformation under Schwartz, their attacking style, their pressing off the ball, the development of young players. They're really good with set plays. I think that's really something that I've noticed from Dynamo, which is very, very promising. They're very accurate with their corners and free kicks. They create a lot of chances that way. And yeah, they've been getting all kinds of wins this season, haven't they? They've toughed out results against Krasnodar and Sochi, comfortable wins against Arsenal Tula, come from behind victories. So it's good that they're keeping pace at the top, and I'm really looking forward to that second game between Dynamo and Zenit, the last game before the winter break. But yeah, it was a good game. I enjoyed Rubin versus Dynamo, good game, and a good win for Dynamo.
That. Just also want to just mention a get well soon to Mikhail Kostyakov, who in that match suffered a horrendous-looking injury. Went in for a sliding tackle. There's been a lot of talk about the Kazan Arena's pitch, or the Akbars Arena's pitch, sorry. I should give it its proper name, or its new name, this season being a bit dodgy. And he went in for a slide tackle, and I couldn't watch the I actually didn't watch the replay. I saw it building up, and I could see what was about to happen. I had to look away. So I actually don't know quite how bad it looked, but it looked like he went in for the slide tackle, and his ankle got caught in the pitch, and it looked like it was going to be a fairly clean break, which not good. But he's going off to Finland for an operation soon, and I imagine we'll miss a good chunk of the rest of the season, which is a shame because he's been Mr. Versatile for Rubin this year. Not a good striker, but when he's played elsewhere, he's done a good job for us. I've got to give him, and I have to give him respect. He actually got us the winner a few weeks back against Rubin, against Siska, when we won 1-0. He scored in the last minute. So as much as he's not one of the stars, I hope he gets well soon, because it was a very nasty looking injury.
Yeah, it was awful. Just awful. Wish him well. Yeah.
Sorry, I laughed. It was a
Well, yeah, he was playing left back at the time, and let's just think this is a guy who's been a striker / attacking midfielder for most of his career.
yeah.
So respect to him for being willing to play anywhere this season, which he has pretty much done, other than centre half.
I've seen it live and then immediately sent it, recorded it and sent it in our chat after you said that you didn't want to see it again. I didn't mean to do it in that way. It was just to show everybody else who hadn't seen it. But then when I went on Twitter, I seen that someone was calling it a trap of an injury because he got his foot trapped in the ground at the Akbar Stadium. And as the Star Wars kind of nerd inside, I found that quite a humorous little thing. And he got like no retweets or likes on his tweet either. And I felt so sorry for him because it deserved a lot more attention than it should have got. But aside from that funny little story that I seen on Twitter, it was horrific. If anyone who hasn't seen it, I don't recommend watching it. But he essentially gets like his ankle trapped under his body between a divot in the pitch and his back of his legs, his femur, and it's rough. It's really rough. I don't know if there's been any. I presume not yet been any announcement on how long he might be out for.
Well, Kostyakov, you mean?
Yeah.
I have no idea. Rubin just put a statement out saying that he's going to go off to Finland for an operation soon. I assume, I haven't even heard officially what the injury is. I'm assuming it's a broken ankle, which I would imagine is a good sort of at least 3 or 4 months, if not more, out. So I can't imagine maybe we'll see him towards the end of the season. I don't know. I don't know the severity of the injury, but I imagine it must be a good few months that he'll be out for, unfortunately.
Yeah, certainly. And I'll finish off now just with some quick news in brief. For those who may have missed it, David has released these latest Russian data update and league add-on for Football Manager. We tweeted it earlier on in the week. I will retweet that again for anyone who might not see it, but you can download it at FM Scout and on Steam Workshop. Just search RFN Data Update. David's basically made like 3,600 or so changes of translations, ability amendments, updates to the foreigner rule that'll bring in the new system eventually, unlocking the 3rd, 4th, and 5th tier of Russian football, including the new groups of the FNL 2 and a lot more. So everyone go download that if you are a Football Manager fan. The nominations for the Russian Young Player of the Year have been announced. They are Agalarov, Bozhinov, Zaharian, Karapuzov, Maradishvili, Mukin, Prokin, Prutsev, Stepanov, Tukavin, Umyarov, and Klusevic. It's going to be Zaharian. I think there's very little doubt in that, in my opinion. There's been some of the functionaries have been voting around for their top 5. It's called the Fast 5, I think, if I remember rightly, or Final 5, or whatever they call it. Young players in Russia, I think Dukov, Simonyan, and Abayev have all released theirs publicly, and as you would expect, Agalarov, Zaharian, Mukin, Tukavin, and Umyarov are in most of them. Little changes here and there, but there's also been quite a shameful situation that took place since the last podcast. In the CSKA Zenit match last week, at the end of the game, 400 CSKA fans were detained without giving reason at the time at the end of the match and were kept in the dark for over hours. Now, the reason is apparently due to the pyro show that took place at the stadium. It was flares and pyro that you would expect to see anywhere, especially in games of this size. There was no injuries caused whatsoever. Now, pyrotechnics are banned in Russia, but you still see them quite regularly on the streets and in the stadiums particularly. So it's just an absolute gross overreaction from the police. As a result of this gross overreaction, there's been some walks out of stadiums in solidarity with the CSKA fans who were detained. in the Krylia versus Siska match, which is at half time at the time of recording right now, they actually showed all of the Siska fans walking out of the stadium at Krylia in solidarity again with those who were detained, and even some Krylia fans joined them too. So excellent from the fan groups there in solidarity with each other, working against gross over abuse of power from the authorities. I think it's, yes, pyrotechnics are banned, absolutely. They can cause injury. I personally find no problem with them, but that's the laws. They are banned. But this is a gross overreaction. Some of the people who were detained have been discussing about it and were saying that they weren't even involved in the pyrotechnics. They were just at the match. And because they had Siska colours on, they were just detained with the rest. It was a gross overreaction, and it doesn't have room in the game anymore. It's an absolute disgrace, and the authorities need to be held to account for their treatment of these normal, good, working class people. And I want to finish off with the last story, which is a little bit more lighthearted to try and bring the pod back around. But Spartak play Akhmat Grozny today. In a funny turn of events, today is actually the 10th anniversary of a game in which Spartak played the precursor to Akhmat, Terek Grozny, on the 4th of December 2011. Spartak won 4-2 in that match, but they were 2-0 down after half an hour. Goals from Asildarov and eventual Zenit player Maurizio. While they were 2-0 down, there was a mass brawl that took place on the pitch. I think every single player, apart from a few, were actually involved in the brawl. Valeri Karpin was head coach at the time and made a few substitutions in the second half, and some of those subs worked pretty damn well. In the second half, 4 goals from Kobarov, a penalty, Ari, and then Zuber in the 95th minute, and Wellington in the 99th minute got the 4-2 win for Spartak. So it's a little bit of a look back 10 years ago between a really interesting match between Akhmat and Spartak. But that is the end of this week's pod. We'll be back again next week, but this is actually David's last podcast before the Christmas break. Myself and Richard will be back again next week, but joined by a couple of guests. And then for the last podcast of the year, we'll be joined by Football Radar's Anna, who is a specialist in Austrian and German football, to go through and take a little bit of a review of the German Revolution to an extent, some good, some bad, that is sweeping the Russian Premier League at the minute. So I'm looking forward to that podcast, but this has been the Russian Football News Podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет с ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.